Hey, music colleagues. My name is Roosevelt Griffin, and I am a director of bands in Harvey, Illinois. I am excited to join the CMA Foundation's United Voices for Music Education initiative. We know last year left us with a gap in instruction and quality time spent teaching our students face to face. I am here to share a lesson plan on jazz articulation to help give you some thought starters as you get back in the classroom. All right, let's begin. This particular lesson is to introduce eighth note articulations for swing style music. The students will need some type of device, whether it's a computer or cell phone, as well as headphones. This lesson will require modeling for students. And the process is when you have a virtual class, the students will mute their microphones. However, you will be unmuted. The process is to sing the rhythm, to articulate the rhythm without the instrument, to blow the rhythm in the instrument using the articulation but not producing sound, and then lastly producing sound. There are a few other articulations that are needed in order to be successful with this, and there are a few other concepts that should take place before this lesson. But for the sake of this lesson, I will stick with eighth notes. The foundation of this approach comes from an approach to articulation that I learned while in university. And it simply uses words or syllables that can actually be transferred into the wind instrument. So day, dee, da, do, do. Again, that's a different lesson, but the articulations come from day, dee, da, do, do, and that da can be transformed to dot or dot. So for this particular lesson, we will use D-day, and dots. So the D, the day, and the dots. So again, the teacher will model the singing, and one by one, the students will model it back. So for example, Jonathan, D-day, do, dot. Jonathan unmutes, D-day, do, dot. Now, while this is going on, the entire class is responding to the actual call. All right? So we can go down the line, and each time the student can unmute and respond. And oftentimes, we can give the student an additional time to respond. And in the end, we will turn around and go through the entire cycle again, but allowing the students to provide feedback. Here's an example. All right, students, repeat after me. Here we are. D, day, do, dot. You say. And we'll stop. Now, at this point, you are unable to hear every student. You are unable to hear every student. You're hoping that they're actually responding to you, but you have no way of really knowing other than the looks on their face on the screen. So again, here we go. 1, 2, ready, and D, day, do, dot, you say. D, day, do, dot, you say. Do, dot, do, dot. D, day, do, dot. Jonathan. D, day, do, dot. Good job again. D, day, do, dot. Dot, D, day, do, dot. Good job. Dot, D, day, do, dot. All right, Mary, you're next. D, day, do, dot. D, day, D. All right, and so forth. The entire class will have an opportunity to do that. And then you also have an opportunity to hear back from the students to know whether or not they're doing it correctly. And if they're not responding the way that you would like them to respond, it can then turn into a conversation for the entire class. What are we not doing? What are you hearing? Are we rushing? Are we slowing down? Can I have more emphasis on the dot? So those type of things, and the class will be involved in that conversation. And so that's the actual articulation behind the swing eighth notes. Now, what you're going to find, obviously, is the latency. So by the fact that everybody has their mutes off, we will hear, as teachers, we will hear the response a moment or a second behind. We just have to understand that, and also understand by the time the student hears what you're saying, it'll be right in sync for that student. All right. So that is one of the elements that you have to get used to. So if you're singing or if you're snapping your fingers, dee day do dot, dee. So at that moment, they may still be singing, but you have to continue to sing in time. So that's very, very important. All right, the next step. When the students have their headphones, you're able to play backing tracks to them while you play. And again, when you play backing tracks to them, when they respond, there will be some latency, but you have to understand that they are hearing in time. All right. And again, because they're muted, they don't hear a difference. At that point, you're the only one that hear a difference. If they unmute, then everybody will hear the difference between you and the student that unmuted. So just keep that in mind. So here's the process. You play the backing track. Now we're listening. I'm going to sing to the backing track. And the backing track could be something off of YouTube. It can be a recording of just a bass, drums, piano playing an F blues or some type of blues or something that's constant that repeats itself. We can use that. So here we are. Sing with me. Press play. So everybody's hearing the music now. All right. Dot dee day do dot. Dot dee day do dot. Now. So now they're blowing it. They're going through the process. And so on. And the next step would be to go around the room and do the same thing. Now, most of the time, 90% of the time, I would do this lesson using an actual piece of music that we're playing. So the backing track would be something that I've already either I created or had someone else create for me for the purpose of this lesson. Okay? So again, if the line was dee day do da, dee day do da. So now that's the articulation exercise. Dee day do da. So now everybody has an opportunity to play that line in the same fashion in which we just talked about the eighth note patterns and swing. So Jonathan, turn. Here we are. Jonathan, it's your turn. All right, here we go. 1, 2, ready, and dee day do da. Now you. That was good. Dee day do da, and all right, good, Jonathan. Well, I tell you what. Did anybody hear what Jonathan just did? Did we hear ta 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 ta? What do you think, Mark? What did you hear? You're not sure? Nancy? Exactly. So this time, Jonathan, we want to make sure that it's smoother. Dee day do da. All right, everybody. Jonathan's turn again. 1, 2, ready, and you go. And good job, Mary. 2, 1, 2, 3, and so on. All right. So again, this approach allows everybody to have a turn. Now the next thing would be for Jonathan to now model this thing for the class. So Jonathan will model. I will mute. He will unmute, and then he will count off. And then everybody will respond to Jonathan. And we can go around the room. And if you have a lot of students, then the section leaders or have the section vote on who will do the modeling for that section. Again, we want to keep the kids engaged during this time as much as possible. We don't want to dwell on one individual. So that's why I also mentioned to allow the students to vote on somebody to do it, and most often they'll vote on somebody who want to do it, because we don't want any kid to feel embarrassed and this entire lesson turn on us, for lack of a better word. So again, model from the teachers stands, model from the students, and that'll give us an opportunity to have discussion on what we heard, or what we should hear. Use phrases from selections that we've chosen to play this year. You can also use random phrases. But the most important thing with swing eighth notes is the actual articulation behind it, making sure that we're using the articulation that will get the sound or the feel that we want. And in addition to the articulation would be listening and having backing tracks or having music that gives a constant examples to the students while we're playing. Next on our list is to identify articulations by the way notes appear on the actual sheet music. So we've used these syllables, D, day, do, da. We've been using that for the previous example. Now, what we want to do next is be able to have the students identify in their music other areas that maybe have different notes but have the same rhythm in which they will articulate the same way. And for you directors and teachers, my approach to eighth notes, and it's a rule of thumb, and there's an exception to every rule, is whenever you see a series of eighth notes, we're saying D-Day, D-Day the entire time. And what that does is it creates momentum to the music and to the phrase. And within the phrase, we can add crescendos and decrescendos. So instead of going D-Day, 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 D, that gets a bit redundant. It's more D-Day, D-Day, D-Day. So there's crescendos, there's motion. So whenever we see a series of eighth notes, D-Day, 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 until you get to the last two eighth notes, in which it's do dot or do da, depending on if it's a long note or a short note. This is just a rule of thumb. If the eighth note series starts on an upbeat, we start with day dee, day dee, day dee, day dee, day, or downbeat, D day dee, day dee, day. All right, so those are some rules of thumbs, and what we do is we provide example after example so that the students will begin to recognize these rhythms. Another common rhythm would be eighth rest, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, or eighth rest, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note tied to a longer note. Day do da, because that's the rule again. D day until you get to the last two eighth notes. So in that case, it would be day do da. If it was eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, or eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note tied to something, it's D day do da. Okay, so those are just some concepts to think about, or some ways to approach the eighth note series. And again, when students begin to see those little patterns or little phrases, they can apply that to various different swing selections that require the swing style. Again, it's not the rule. It's just an approach that I take to do it, and I get pretty good results from it. And there are exceptions. So there are times where you definitely don't want to do what I just said. But when we're dealing with beginners or maybe second year students, we can use these approaches to help them with this or internalizing or approaching swing eighth notes. But with that said, none of that trumps using recordings. Obviously, Count Basie and Duke Ellington, I love those bands. Obviously, there are plenty of bands that are around today that you can use, but we have to also listen to get examples from. And in fact, a lot of times we can listen to selections and take phrases from the selections, take eighth note patterns from the selections, and then do the same exercise that we did in the lesson. So I hope that was a little something that you can take and again modify it the way you need to modify it. I think the most important thing is to know that we can do this type of lesson virtually as well as face to face.